So joining me in studio, as I mentioned, I have Jeremy Mahugh. He is with an organization called Deliver Fund. They're wisely based here in Texas, in Dallas, Texas. And the briefest of introductions about him, he is a former U.S. Special Operations, a former Navy SEAL sniper. After his time in the military, he returned to the Middle East as an operative for the National Level Intelligence Agency, stayed there 5 more years, came home, and now became part of this organization called Deliver Fund that tries to get after human trafficking. So, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So glad you're here. So I read your whole website today. We'll start with, tell us why Deliver Fund is unique in what you do in trying to fight human trafficking. What is your niche in the human trafficking world?
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, you're starting to see it as a buzzword. You're starting to see more articles and more attention come out around human trafficking. But really, there's 3 different ways that you can address this issue. And most organizations actually do something along the victim-centric side, where they're either helping the victims with rehab, rehabilitation, or they're doing awareness type campaigns and stuff like that. The other side is typically what law enforcement has done. So if you remember Chris Hansen and the To Catch a Predator show,
yes,
right, where they would put out some sort of solicitation, and they would get people who would be purchasers that would show up, and then they would say, hey, we caught you. Well, that's really what law enforcement has been doing. They'd put up a fake ad, they'd get purchasers, so they'd catch the demand side. But nobody's
These are
really
purchasers of people.
Absolutely, they're there to purchase typically sex, right? So the third part of that equation is the human trafficker. So the first two, one treats the demand, the other one treats symptoms, and really, if you want to go after the storefront, if, as we say here in Texas, if you want to cut the head off the snake, you got to go after that storefront. You've got to go after the trafficker, and usually they're 1 or 2 degrees of separation from the crime. And so, you know, today the way they're being sold, 80% of this we would say is being sold online on the internet. So through online advertisements. And so we need technology and capability to figure out who's behind that.
Okay, so I think on your website mentions, but I want to ask you to expand. You, for example, have a Navy SEAL background. You have a background in the military and special operations. Is your organization really focused on people who've done kind of investigative work in some way with the military? Is that?
Definitely on the intelligence side, we hire people from the special operations community who have also an intelligence background because they understand the methodology. So it's not so much different than hunting terrorists, right? For example, one of our senior analysts, I call her the Huntress. She actually, or okay, AKA Pimp Slayer, she actually was previously with the Air Force as a analyst and intelligence analyst for them. Then she worked for the NSA, and then she worked for the FBI doing essentially terrorist watch listing, right? So she was trying to find bad guys before something went boom. And so now she works for us because she's got a couple of kids at home, and she's transitioned her job, but now that's what she does. She hunts down bad guys in a different capacity.
So you're thinking of these human traffickers, sex traffickers, in the same way we do hunting down terrorists. You're focusing on the network itself. And I want to talk a minute what the network is, but I love the idea of using people trained by our military, learning our techniques, figuring out how something is structured and how you get in and figure out who's involved. And those are the people doing it at Deliver Fund.
Oh, absolutely. And better than that is we come from that past of being able to know who in our intelligence communities make certain technologies, right? If it's for the FBI or the NSA or the CIA or for any of those government federal sides, we know who the vendors are that make those technologies. But we can go to them with this mission and say, hey, we need you to tailor this or tailor that and make it specific for what we're doing as it applies here in the U.S. Because clearly we have to abide by, you know, the Constitution, and everything that we do has to be admissible in court, and all those things are discoverable, and all that's important here.
What kinds of things are these vendors supplying, and what kind of objects or technology are they providing you? What do you mean?
I would say one example is the story about Backpage.com. Are you familiar with what happened? So Backpage was actually headquartered right here in Dallas.
Yep.
And Backpage was the largest online purveyor of escort ads. But within those escort ads, there was human trafficking. A high percentage of that was human trafficking. And of that, some of those were trafficking of minors. So they were found to be complicit in selling minors for sex, as well as laundering money, et cetera, et cetera. So within their website, they had 12 other websites like evilempire.com, sincity.com, things that don't sound nefarious at all. But all of that was running together to sell sex. Now, the technology that's needed is to figure out who's behind it. And so we haven't got to a point where it's one click and boom, here to catch a trafficker. But like, we're working towards that, right? We're getting it closer and closer. But ultimately, it's a combination of different platforms, and then we have to be able to get that into the hands of law enforcement. Because again, I'm no longer the person to kick in the door. We need, in the United States, we need law enforcement, whether it's local, state, or federal, to be able to make that arrest, get that successful prosecution, and that's where we raise the risk to the trafficker.
Okay, so you're trying to tap into finding networks that actually work in human and sex and child trafficking. How big are these networks? This is like 3 people in their basement in Montana somewhere, or I mean, how big are these networks and how organized are they?
Well, there's both, right? Like, you have some very organized, very high profile things, but you have a lot of what I would call low hanging fruit. And so within that, let's say 80% of that is very low hanging fruit. But those guys may be working independently or with just a couple of people, but they are bad guys who talk to other bad guys. So one of the important things about how we attack this is to be able to provide law enforcement with a platform that can be collaborated across all jurisdictions, because you would think this maybe existed, but it didn't. So now it does. Now we have that platform, and now as we equip and we train law enforcement how to use that equipment, let's say you're building a case here in Dallas, and let's say you are part of DPS and you're building a case on a human trafficker, the computer is going to auto associate. It's going to know if a piece of that information is tied to a case in Atlanta, right? So now it's across jurisdiction lines. One turns to federal case across state lines, but also you have all that information, and you know the officer that you need to talk to there to have that collaboration. And that didn't exist. So now we can actually start to see almost like a heat map of where these traffickers are selling, where they're moving, and let law enforcement know who's in their area, when they're there, and we can follow it around the entire U.S.
Okay, I'm loving this. Just to get a picture of I want to talk about the victims in just a moment, but the trafficker is finding people who will supply him with women and girls, and then, I mean, essentially it's like slavery. I mean, they think they own these girls. You're using the terms of selling or buying a person. So clearly that's slavery if you sell them by a person. It's
100% modern day slavery. And by definition, human trafficking is by force, fraud, or coercion, right? And they're not, these girls are not allowed to keep any of the profits of their labor either.
So these girls are literally somehow snatched, end up in the hands of traffickers, and then traffickers have to be finding the customers or the clientele to pay them. So someone's got to be setting up shop somewhere with these trafficked, owned girls and women, right? I mean, they got to set up shop and find customers.
We'd like to think that it's very simple, but it's not. And a lot of the victims who we've talked to, we've been able to help. They'll tell you that, we have had this business around for a long, long time. With, if we called it, prostitution and pimping, all of that has been around for a long, long time. What we see today is the majority of that has turned into human trafficking, and it's become a lot easier for these pimp traffickers to sell their product online and control all of that without it having to be on the red light district street corner, right? Where it used to be in the open, now it's happening behind closed doors. It's happening online, and it also allows them to be able to sell younger and younger children in that. So
they're finding their customers online.
So sometimes they're finding their customers online. Sometimes they're luring them into that. Sometimes they're preying on victims that come from a single family home. Maybe there's already narcotics. There's some emotional hook there. They can start to lure them in. And I think it needs to also be said, because a lot of times we think, well, first we think that human trafficking happens in Cambodia or Thailand or somewhere else. But we're talking about American citizens exploiting American citizens, primarily American men and women who are selling to American men, American women and children. And those, especially those women, maybe it's not a minor, but like, let's say somebody thinks they're going to be a buyer, they're going to be a purchaser. We call them the John sometimes, but they're a sex purchaser. They may not know that they're purchasing a trafficked victim. It is the job of that trafficked victim to make sure that the purchaser does not know that she's trafficked, right? So how would they know? Sometimes they think they might be doing her a favor there. I'm giving her some money, like I'm helping her out.
She needs money, and
at the end of the day, how would they know?
So what is the age range of these victims that you involved in cases you've been involved in?
I think across the board, the average age of kids that come into this is about 13 years old.
Oh my gosh.
The average age of what we've seen is probably around 17. So still minors.
Yeah. You had a story on your website involving a girl named Sarah, and that's the name you at least gave her on the website. And the reason the story was scary, I wanted to ask you to tell it, is because, or I picture, many picture people think, well, it's probably people, as you say, single parent homes, nobody's around, no one's paying attention, maybe they're kind of lost anyway. But if you would briefly tell the story of Sarah that's on your website, I'd love to have you do that.
Is Samantha or Sarah?
I think Sarah was one.
So there's a couple.
Tell whatever one you want. I want to just make it real for us.
I think that the one on the website that I'm thinking of is Samantha, which is one of the first cases that we had. And Samantha was actually, I think this is a representation of exactly what happens. She was 12 years old when she was first trafficked. Her mom was a heroin addict. She lived in a town in New Mexico. She was from there. Her dad had left, disowned her and her mom. So her mom's an addict. At 12 years old, she's sold more or less probably by her mom for drug money, which then over a course of 10 years, the year that Deliver Fund started was the year that we were able to get to her. But prior to that, for 10 years, she had been sold. So now she's 22 years old. And everybody looks at you like a 22-year-old prostitute, right? Who's a heroin addict. But the reality is, for 10 years, she was bought and sold. She was sold to 10 different traffickers. She'd been arrested a couple of times. She'd been in and out of a program. She had been assaulted by people that were part of that program. So, like, she has no trust for anybody.
Right.
A lot of her mindset is still that she's 13 or 14 years old because she has mentally shut herself down at that point. It's just a very, very fascinating story because we actually have read through a lot of her journals. She actually her trafficker was letting her keep some journals.
That's amazing.
And so you can see exactly what she was thinking on a day-to-day basis. And you can also see where the heroin kicked in.
So she became a heroin addict also.
Absolutely, she did.
Yeah.
And so she was, for those 10 years, she was bought and sold, in her own words, 6 to 20 times a day. And I think that's it.
You're talking about customers using her services or using her 6 to 20 times a day.
And when you say using her services, let's keep in mind that, like, she's 22 now, but like for those years, she was a minor. So that is statutory rape, right? So she was raped
thousands of times
a year.
Oh my gosh. Okay, and you know, I know it's not your specialty within Deliver Fund to deal with the victims and how they move forward. I'm glad other people do that because you can't even imagine ever getting your head on straight after that. You can't even imagine. And you don't have any sense of normal life, normal relations, normal friendships. And oh my gosh. Okay, so when you find information on these trafficking networks, you turn it over to, is it more the FBI or is it usually state officials?
We try and do a couple things because if it's just us building cases, we can only build so many cases. So we advise and we build cases and we pass that intelligence over to all of the above, whether it's local, state, or federal. We work with the FBI, Homeland Security, all the way down to your local PD. I mean, we, like you were talking about Fort Worth, we've actually trained Fort Worth PD as well as the sheriff's department there with Tarrant County. And so, matter of fact, we actually came in because they didn't have the budget when the Sheriff Wayburn came in. We actually bought them laptops and all the technology licenses and train them how to use that. But that's how we can do this at scale, is getting that technology and the training for how to use the equipment, but also the methodology on how to do this so they can build their own cases. And as we do that, what we're talking about, as big as this problem is, and this problem is so big that a few years ago, there was the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said that within a 5-year span, trafficking of minors for sex in the United States went up 846%.
That's exactly what I was looking for in my papers. What was that percentage you said?
So
846%.
846% increase. And what's made that available is technology, right?
Yeah.
Your smartphone, all of that. So how do you fight that? Well, like that's where Deliver Fund comes in. But to do that at scale, we need to be able to get law enforcement trained on the equipment that can do that. And then we tout a very strong statistic of our own that we say when properly funded, the impact that Deliver Fund can have is an 80% reduction on human trafficking in the United States within 5 years.
Okay, I do want to talk about your funding in a moment, but I have another question I didn't even mention to you ahead of time, but I read this story online about some airline flight, and there was a stewardess on board, and she's watching this two people sitting next to each other, and she just thought something seemed off about the girl, like she's being trafficked. And so she went to the girl's room, the story, and she wrote her a note, "Are you in trouble? Do you need help?" or something like that. And she went back and said to the girl, "Honey, you look like you need to go to the restroom. It's right there." And so she was able to communicate with this girl, and she was right. And so by the time they landed, they had authorities ready to arrest the guy. But the question is, do you ever help the average Joe Q public figure out what should you watch for? What should everyone listening watch for in terms of trying to figure out if someone's being trafficked?
Yes, and the short answer is we actually put out a newsletter. We put out some tips in there. We do something called Kevlar for kids so that parents know what kind of apps and what technology to be aware of. And we're continually putting out information on that stuff. And it changes from time to time as well.
But I mean, if you see, because it's funny, since we've been reading and hearing more about this, my husband and I have been various places, and we're both more alert, and he said, that looks kind of odd, and then you realize, I mean, you're trying to figure out if anything is wrong there. So,
You'll often see like some sort of control going on there. A lot of time these victims they're not allowed to speak to anybody. They're not allowed to look at anybody, so they'll have to look down on the ground, and they won't be able to speak to anybody. So, and you can tell by their appearance sometimes too, and a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are on narcotics. A lot of times heroin, because we call heroin the leash for a reason. And so
because they get addicted and they have to,
they'll do anything for that next fix for sure. And so there's some of those indicators that you can pick up there. But that's a longer episode right there.
Sure is. Okay, so Deliver Fund, your website is deliverfund.org.
Yep.
And so you're a 501c3.
Yes.
So you're counting on donations.
We are. If law enforcement had the money to pay for this technology and this training, we wouldn't need to do that. But go ask your local law enforcement, and I guarantee you they'll say that they're under budgeted, they're under resourced, they're under trained. All of these things is we're there to fill that gap and bridge that gap for them. So we do take private donations. So we can fund scholarships for those officers to come through, and we try and pick the most impactful officers in the most impactful areas and start there. And we're also on Twitter and Instagram and all the other social media. So
I think we were talking a moment ago about who these victims are, and there was, I'm sure that this Samantha story is true, but this Sarah story that you had included in something you sent. She left her job at a local fast food restaurant, someone she thought was a friend, a woman her boyfriend had introduced her to a few weeks earlier. So this story, again, trying to help people see this is not just wayward children with no parents.
She thought she was going to go sell expensive purses, and that, and the next thing you know, she's literally lured right out of the fast food, I won't say which
parking
restaurant, but she leaves the window and goes and jumps in this person's car and is immediately trafficked.
Because she thought the guy she was dating was her boyfriend, but the boyfriend was actually setting the girl up to come.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I hate those kind of stories. You want to say never let your girls date. Just don't even let your daughters date. No, that's not really true. Anyway, but on a serious note, this idea of this is a girl who's got a job.
Right.
She's not, wandering the streets. She has a job, and she got duped into it. So I really think it's important to recognize the innocence of some of these victims.
Right.
I mean, they're all innocent. They were wronged by this, but some of these young girls they may have been headed off to a relatively normal life and finished high school and head to college, and then their whole life is steered off. And so it's just a horrible thing
happening
happening.
to boys too, and we don't really talk about that as much. We have one story that we put out, and we call him Noah, but I think this boy was about 15 years old. This happened recently in the last 12 months, and he was on one of these gaming stations. And as you know, like these gaming stations now, they communicate with people from wherever. So like he actually was gaming and playing a game with talking to somebody in another state, and had built rapport with him. Over a period of time. That individual comes and says, "Hey, I'm 2 blocks up. Come out of your house. Come say hi to me." Kid comes up there, jumps in the car, says hi. Guy takes his cell phone, tosses it out, and luckily within 24 hours, we were able to track down who that guy was and where he was. Already had the boy in another state, but a very cool story. We were able to help law enforcement recover that boy. And figure out who the trafficker was, and he wasn't he wasn't an individual. He was part of a bigger ring that was doing that. And so, like I have a son. I don't have a daughter yet. I'm trying to have a daughter, but like this is important for our boys and girls, and these are our boys and girls.
Oh, they are. They're all our boys and girls. So, folks out there, I really want to tout this organization, Deliver Fund. It's deliverfund.org, and you can donate to help this. In fact, just go read the website. If you go read the website, you'll get inspired, I'm sure. Everyone involved it's a unique niche within the broad span of people trying to prevent human trafficking. But if you're actually getting, as you say, getting the traffickers, then you're really putting that is kind of interrupting the flow before the child is ever grabbed.
Absolutely. And the other important thing about this is like to be able to prosecute this successfully, like you need the data. The data is super important, because if you're just relying on a heroin addicted prostitute, I'm going to tell you the FBI is not even going to take that case.
Because she can't testify, she can't remember, she can't,
she's not a reliable witness. And so because of the data that we end up having, and we during our class, we've had officers build a case and actually call home to their own jurisdiction and get arrests made like the next day. And they were like, this is amazing because we have all the information. It's like having all your homework already done. And because of that, the cases that we've been involved with, that Deliver Fund's been involved with, have had a 100% conviction rate.
I love that, 100% conviction rate. I'm a lawyer by background. That I will tell you, that's a rare thing for any organization to be able to say. 100% lock
Probably
these
won't be able
people
to tout
up.
that forever because some prosecutor will screw it up.
Right.
However, thus far, we've had the cases that we've been involved with have had a 100% conviction rate. And the important piece of that is the data, right? Because the data is there that shows what's been happening.
Boy. Do you have any idea how long these people go away for once they're convicted of trafficking?
So federal charge is 15 years, and sometimes they can stack those. We've had one that I think was turned into multiple lifetime
consecutive.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm into lifetime for all of them. But go ahead.
Yeah, but it depends on the jurisdiction. Again, in a place like New Mexico, this will burn you. It's a 3 to 5 year sentence for human trafficking.
Oh my gosh! Well, that's got to change.
That's why
some legislator could
make it a federal case.
I'm telling you, some people could be successful as candidates and say, "I'm running to change this law. This is crazy. With 3 to 5 years, a guy should never get out again." If you're willing to do that kind of stuff.
The good thing is, it's getting more awareness, and people are starting to realize what's going on. There's more organizations that are pushing that over the line on the legislative side. Montana, where I'm actually from, is they're doing a great job. And one of the ways that they did this was the Attorney General brought 3 traffic victims in to speak and tell their story to the state legislature. And I believe it was a pretty much unanimous vote at that point. And now it's a lifetime sentence in Montana. But
I'll take it. Jeremy Mahugh, Deliver Fund, deliverfund.org. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
This was a great interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Okay, folks, I tell you, go to read Deliver Fund. You will love this website. You will learn so much. You will figure out this is a huge, to use Donald Trump's term, huge problem, and it needs every American involved. So do that. I hope you will.